All right, we're going live. Finally, back on Fridays at our usually scheduled time. It looks like everything's working okay. Testing, testing. I think we're up and running. Awesome. All right, everybody, welcome back to Seeking Shalom, where we're exploring God's redemptive plan for the world from Genesis to Revelation. Every Friday, we're diving into the biblical narrative of our past, present, and future, discussing where Jesus is leading his church for the days ahead and the fulfillment of the Great Commission. And we have some amazing chapters to look at today. Last week, we looked at Amos and Hosea. If you remember, we met on Thursday last week, so a little bit different, but we're back on Fridays. Amos and Hosea prophesied together during the divided kingdom of Israel and Judah prior to the Assyrian invasion. Amos and Hosea described the escalating wickedness of Israel's rebellion against God's covenant, the proceeding tribulation, and the final regathering and restoration of Israel at the arrival of their messianic king. They're directly referencing the grand biblical narrative that dates all the way back to the time of Moses. They're applying it to their generation circumstantially, but they're drawing their audience's attention to the transcendent storyline that even exceeded their generation. Now, this week, we're going to be jumping into Micah. And you might notice Micah sounds a lot like Amos and Hosea and Isaiah. And you'd be right, because Micah prophesied alongside Isaiah just after Amos and Hosea, who we looked at last week. We've seen a lot of parallels. We'll see a lot of parallels between Micah and Isaiah, but I wanted to cover Micah first because Isaiah is so large and in-depth. It just made more sense to go ahead and cover Micah now before we get lost into the a wonderful book that is Isaiah. I'm looking forward to that. Going to be jumping into that beginning next week, Lord willing. So as always, these chapters are all packed with lots of detail that I have included in the notes. So don't forget that you can log in to the Servant Leader Network website or app to access these notes and recordings all for free. Let me see if I can just pull up a little, there they are, a little side by side on the stream so you can see the notes. It's awesome. There's quite a bit of detail here, and I'm not going to cover all of this in the stream. And so if you feel like sometimes I'm running over some things or moving kind of quickly, that's okay. Often I am, because I'm trying to spend 10 minutes or less per chapter, which some of you might be laughing at that, but I think I've actually been doing pretty good. And I'm getting back to where I can put the Bible on screen. There we go. And we've got the notes as your reference for the long haul. So after our chapter overview, I'm hosting a discussion group for our ministry partners on the Servant Leader Network app where we can ask questions, discuss where we see God's redemptive plan in current events today, and explore how we can build in continuity with where Jesus is leading his church in the future. Seeking Shalom is all made possible by the prayers and support of our ministry partners. Anybody can sign up and they can join that discussion group every Friday as soon as the stream ends. We transfer over to that in the Servant Leader Network app. And you can find out more about joining that or partnering with us on our website and be added to that discussion group. So awesome. All right, everybody, here we go. I'm going to open up. Let's see if I can get the passages on screen. There's the notes, but there is Micah 2. Again, there's lots of great stuff in Micah, but I do like to try to focus on the passages that have the most relevance to the grand biblical narrative that even transcends the messages that are just for that generation, that speak to even the final restoration and the Messianic age. So that's what we're going to be doing here. I'm going to make sure I have everything up so I can navigate it for you. Awesome. All right. So Micah enters the scene. I have Micah, a lot of scholars agree that Micah prophesied around the second half of the 8th century BC. I have him kind of dialed into between 740 and 700 BC in the area of Judah. And so he is going to witness the Assyrian invasion, but his prophecies start out just before Assyria's invasion. Now, as we progress further into additional Hebrew prophets like Micah and Amos and Hosea, who we covered last week, I want to review, there's an ongoing tension between approaches to Old Testament prophecy that would be timely to discuss right now. Using Micah maybe as the ideal example, some commentators insist that all of Micah's prophecies are entirely historical with no present or future relevance apart from their allegorical and moral interpretations. There are two significant problems, though, with this perspective of total historical fulfillment. First, Micah did not consider his prophecies to be limited to the present threat of his generation. Second, no one can deny that Micah has vast segments of prophecy that were not historically fulfilled. They would remain unfulfilled or just be completely wrong, which would ultimately characterize Micah as a wildly false prophet. So, just to put us all at ease, the Old Testament prophets did not assume that their prophecies were limited to their generation, but they anticipated an ultimate future fulfillment at the time and manner of God's ultimate choosing. Micah died full of hope and anticipation for future fulfillment in generations that were yet unborn, even as the author of Hebrews reminds us in chapter 11. Starting in verse 32, I've included this in the notes. I'll just read it for you briefly. I'm not going to throw it on screen. But Hebrews says, "And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell the stories of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and all the prophets." Scooting on to verse 39, he says, "All of these, though commended through their faith, did not receive the ultimate fulfillment of what was promised, since God had provided something better for us who are still awaiting the future fulfillment to be included in that fulfillment with them, that apart from us, their fulfillment would not be made perfect." Alrighty, so let's jump in then to Micah chapter 2. Again, Micah is applying the grand storyline of the redemptive plan dating all the way back to Moses to his generation, but he's also calling his generation's attention to the grander narrative that transcends it. So there's kind of an interim fulfillment of biblical prophecy happening in Micah's generation, but it's not the final fulfillment. So as we read this, you can interpret it both ways, as he is speaking about a future fulfillment that we're still waiting for, and a fulfillment that's happening right in front of his eyes in an interim way. Isaiah goes on to really substantiate that interpretation of both a historical and future fulfillment, which we'll get into as soon as we get to Isaiah, which will be next week. I'm so excited. That's going to be so fun. All right. So in Micah chapter 2, Micah is really diving into the warnings against corrupt leadership that are in Israel at the time. And he concludes with a description of Israel's final deliverance when their messianic king arrives. And those two verses toward the end, in verses 12 and 13, pull Micah 2 into a end times relevance because they're yet unfulfilled. But a lot of what Micah is describing was relevant for the generation in their day. So, woe to those who devise wickedness and work evil on their beds. When the morning dawns, they perform it because it is in the power of their hand. They covet fields and seize them, and houses and take them away, and oppress a man and his house and a man and his inheritance. Literally, he's describing these landlords who were just seizing property. This description of this corrupt behavior among Israel's landlords is an example of this escalating promotion of sin in the land. Landlords were unilaterally seizing land and homes from tenants, and Amos and Hosea had recently given similar warnings, which we looked at just last week. Therefore, thus says the Lord, behold, against this family I'm devising disaster. Now, the Lord's starting to talk about the tribulation that comes upon Israel as a result of this rebellion, not just Israel, but the earth. But in Micah's real specific case, he's isolating Israel specifically. But this also applies to the whole earth at the end of the age. Behold, against this family I'm devising disaster, which you cannot remove your necks. Wow, it's like you're really caught in this disaster, which is really similar to language from Amos and Hosea that we looked at last week. You will not walk haughtily, and it will be a time of disaster. In that day, we get that little mention of in that day that we love so much. It's not always meaning that it's just end time relevance. It definitely mattered to Micah's generation, but it gives us a little bit of a hint that He's talking about that grand scope. They shall take up a taunt song against you and moan bitterly and say, they're utterly ruined. He changed the portion of my people, how he removes it from me. Really, what's happening is the oppressed, the people who have been oppressed, are mocking the complaint of their oppressors. So they're mocking them, saying the oppressed would say, oh, we've been ruined. God has changed his portion and he removes it from us, and he's removing us from the promises that he gave to us. Basically, this completely unjustified complaint that God is too harsh. He's not treating them fairly. And of course, that's ridiculous because it's the oppressors who are not treating God's people fairly. Therefore, you will have no cast in the line by lot in the assembly of the Lord. Basically, the Lord's saying, I'm removing you from the assembly of those who are in the covenant. You're being removed from the families of the covenant for your wrongdoing. And then look at this. Do not preach, thus they preach. It's kind of interesting little play on words, telling the actual authentic prophets who were giving them true prophetic warnings, telling them, don't preach. And you shouldn't say such things as this, like, disgrace will not overtake us. Now, my ESV version includes one should not preach such things in the quote, which you could kind of say maybe the wicked in Israel would be saying one shouldn't preach such things as these warnings, but other translations remove that, and it's just the Lord saying, no, you should not say disgrace will not overtake us. Either way you look at it, it's pretty well the same message, because they're in this belief, this delusion that God is distant. Remember, the fool says in his heart there is no God, meaning the fool says in his heart God doesn't care. God's apathetic. He's not part of the equation. And he's not going to act there's not going to be any consequence for our misbehavior and our rebellion against the covenant. Therefore, disgrace will not overtake us. It's a complete delusion because God does act. And that's what Amos and Hosea and Micah and Isaiah are all really highlighting here. Should this be said, O house of Jacob, the Lord has grown impatient. Are these his deeds? Basically, they're complaining God is being too harsh. And he's being harsh in an unjustified type of way, which again is just so silly. But lately, my people have risen up as an enemy. And remember how, I think it was Amos or Hosea last week, one of them actually referred to the wicked in Israel as the sinful nation. I mean, here they are, stuck in this rebellion, in this sinful condition. And the Lord says, you've risen up as my enemy. You strip the rich robe from those who pass by, trustingly, with no thought of war. It's basically saying your peacetime allies and even your kin, you're betraying them and robbing them in broad daylight. The women of my people you drive out from their houses, and the young you take away my splendor forever from the young. Arise and go. He's basically saying your rights to the land are being revoked. The rights that the Lord gave you, the same way that you've been revoking the rights of tenants who are in the land lawfully, I'm going to remove your rights to the land as well. Say, arise and go. This is not going to be a place of rest for you because of the uncleanness that destroys with a grievous destruction. If a man should go about and utter wind and lies, saying, I will preach to you of wine and strong drink, then he would be the preacher of this people. Essentially, they are totally propping up just the messages they want to hear. They're only listening to whether the teaching is actually true or false. It's just what they want to hear. It's just what builds up their arrogance, and that has no regard for if it's actually true or not. And the Lord is saying, no. We're going to actually have to we're going to have to address this wickedness. And here's where it comes with verses 12 and 13. Like I said, these are yet unfulfilled. I don't think there's any commentator that really would argue that verses 12 and 13 have a ultimate historical fulfillment. If anything, they're arguing that Micah might have been wrong about his application of this promise. I will surely assemble all of you, O Jacob. I will gather the remnant of Israel, and I will set them together like a sheepfold, like a flock in its pasture, a noisy multitude of men. He who opens the breaches goes up before them. They break through and pass the gate, going out by it. Their king passes on before them, the Lord at their head. Now, this is beautiful. Now, imagine this in the context of the arrival of Israel's messianic king. This is the promise that Micah is really referring to, that it transcends the moment of his generation and their Assyrian invasion. No, he's talking about their ultimate deliverance in the time when the messianic king, what I'm trying to say, arrives. I will surely assemble all of you, basically saying I'm going to regather all of my children, the faithful to my covenant and the repentant, and I will gather the remnant of Israel and I will set them together like sheep in a fold. Now that little phrase, like sheep in a fold, is real similar to the language for Basra. That is the meaning of the name of the village or settlement that was Basra in ancient Edom, what would be modern day kind of southern Jordan. And this is the same language that's being referenced in Psalm 68. David references this, that there are captives that are brought out of like sheep in a fold from this place of Basra. It's southern Jordan, southern Judah, as the Messiah proceeds into Israel, into Judah, and toward Jerusalem. He enters through Basra and he brings the sheep out of the fold. He brings the captives out of Basra. It's real prophetic meaning. Like a flock in its pasture, a noisy multitude of men. These captives are being released and they're being reassembled, and there's this noisy multitude. And he who opens the breach is the Messiah. It's literally describing the Messiah breaking their bonds, like he's breaking open the prison doors. He's breaking open the gates that are binding them, and they break through and they pass by the gate, again, a gate of captivity, going out by it, and the king passes on before them. The king is leading this messianic army to defeat Israel's adversaries as this final deliverance, this great grand final hope that Israel has in the messianic age. It's beautiful. And these verses obviously have yet to be fulfilled, because this is not what happened at all in the generation of Micah or the nearby generations of Babylon or anything like that. So remarkable stuff in Micah chapter 2, really isolating in on verses 12 and 13 as the unique relevance to the generation of Jesus' return. But that these descriptions of corruption are also meant to characterize Israel's rebellion and really the earth's rebellion of Psalm 2 as we approach that generation. Okay, let me make sure I'm not missing anything else in my notes for that chapter. Oh, awesome. Yeah, I'll just mention, I do mention these in the notes, that the other references from last week that would really parallel Micah chapter 2, verses 12 and 13 that we just looked at, real similar, would be Hosea 1, verse 10, Hosea 2, verse 14, and Hosea 11, verse 10. And that would make sense because Micah would have known of Hosea's prophecies. They were contemporary, or Micah was prophesying just after Hosea. So to have those references, I've got them in the notes so that you can see them there. I'm not going to jump to them now, but that's part of the fun of the notes that I really recommend, so that you can see some of the parallels and cross references that I'm able to include there more, just because I can't do them here for the sake of time. Okay, let's jump on to Micah 4. Beautiful. Micah 4 is a lot of fun because Micah is describing the Messiah's reign in restored Jerusalem during the Messianic age, after freeing Jewish captives from tribulation captivity and defeating Israel's adversaries in a great final battle. And Micah is going to describe all of this. Again, this is much bigger than Micah's generation. Nobody can argue that Micah 4 has a ultimate fulfillment in history, because it just totally has yet to happen. And so what we're looking at here are really promises that we're going to experience, or our children, or whatever. We still have yet to see these things fulfilled in a way that give us hope and expectation for the future, and a description of God's intention for his redemptive plan for the world. So the first few verses parallel directly, almost, I think quite identically, Isaiah chapter 2. Now remember, Micah and Isaiah prophesy simultaneously. And so nobody really knows exactly which prophet said it first, but they say the exact same thing. Actually, interestingly, a lot of scholars argue that this was part of the proof of the sovereignty of this prophetic word, the authenticity of the prophetic word, because they in fact weren't quoting each other. They were quoting the inspiration of the Spirit directly, and that authentic inspiration produced the exact same prophecy, line for line, word for word. Some people argue, no, they wouldn't have even seen each other's text. It would have just been identical because that's the nature of the authenticity of that prophetic word. I don't know. That might be a little bit large, a large leap to take just on faith. Maybe there would have been a common prophecy that they would be referencing together. For it to be so identical, it's really interesting. But when we get to Isaiah chapter 2, we'll look at it. In Micah's case, in Micah chapter 4, he says, "It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of mountains. It will be lifted up above the hills." Now, I just want to show you. We're just in verse 1, and it's awesome. Let me show you in the notes the other references that parallel this. Hold on, I got to get down to here's chapter 4. Okay, look at this. In Psalm 67, or no, here we go. Psalm 48, I almost went too far down. If I highlight it, you can at least see where it is in the notes. If you're following along, there it is. The first section of Micah chapter 4, and I've got these cross references. In Psalm 48, the psalmist says, "His holy mountain is beautiful in elevation," speaking of God's holy city. In Psalm 68, which we do know was David, "Why do you look in hatred, O many-peaked mountain?" Talking about that wicked confederation. "At the mountain that God desires for his abode. Yes, where the Lord will dwell forever." He's talking about Mount Zion. And Psalm 68 goes on to describe the exaltation of God's holy mountain as the Messiah enters to reign and rule. That's quite remarkable. All right, the cross references are fun. You can see there's more. Maybe we'll jump back to them here in a moment. But let me get back to Micah chapter 4. We'll have too much fun cross referencing. But okay, the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of mountains. Now, at this point, whether that is a literal or figurative exaltation, it really doesn't matter. It's either way. The Lord's government the Messianic King's government will be the most authoritative government in that day. And it may very well be that the location of the government is truly the highest mountain in that day, because many other biblical authors are going to reference complete overhauls of the topography of the Middle East that really do seem to be that Jerusalem actually will be literally elevated in terms of altitude to be the highest mountain in the region. So that actually very well may be literal. I go into some of that in the notes, but let's move on. Many nations will come and say, "Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, the house of the Lord, the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths." Micah is describing, not Israel, Gentile kings and heads of state and nations coming to the mountain of the Lord, coming to Jerusalem, the house of the God of Jacob, asking to be taught his ways, that they may walk in his paths. Now, some of the neat parallels or cross references, let me just pull them up so you can see them. Many of them are here. And I even give you a bonus reference to Revelation 21, where John sees this in the book of Revelation, quite literally. And here's Psalm 67, where David says, "Let the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you judge the peoples with equity and guide the nations upon the earth." Literally describing the Messianic King ruling in Jerusalem in the future, guiding the nations in their restoration and salvation process. How about Psalm 82, where the psalmist says, "Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit the nations." How about Psalms 58? Mankind will say, "Surely there is a reward for the righteous. Surely there is a God who judges on the earth." And that mankind will say is not just Israel receiving salvation. It's the Gentile nations recognizing at Israel's final deliverance, surely all mankind will say. This becomes the testimony of the earth, where it's clearly, plainly visible. There's no denying anymore that surely there is a God, or there is a reward for the righteous. Surely there's a God who judges the earth. All right, Psalm 47, quickly. God reigns over the nations. God sits on his holy throne. The princes of the peoples all gather as the people of the God of Abraham, for the shields of the earth, meaning the authority structures of the earth, belong to God. He is highly exalted. These are all references that would have been prophesied before Micah that he could draw from to write this prophecy as well. And then the bonus reference, as John the Apostle, jumping way ahead by many hundred years, is having his revelation experience. He sees the new Jerusalem. He's seeing the heavenly city during the Messianic age, as we talked about in Psalm 48. But look at, I'm jumping ahead. I know I'm breaking my chronological protocol. But look at what John sees. He says, by its light, meaning the heavenly city's light, the nations will walk. The kings of the earth will bring their glory to it, and its gates will never be shut night or day, and there will be no night there. They will bring into it the glory and honor of the nations. It's this interactivity of the nations of the earth and the holy city during the Messianic age. That's all super remarkable to study. And we'll get into that more when we finally get to the book of Revelation, which will be toward the end of our chronological study. And again, the prophecy continues. For out of Zion will go forth the law, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples. He will decide disputes for strong nations far away. Can you see all these parallels? And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations will not lift up sword against each other, neither will they learn war anymore. What a huge promise for peace. Isaiah copies that, or vice versa, word for word. They share the same promise of peace, a lasting, permanent, global period of peace in the Messianic age, under the guidance and leadership of the Messianic king in Israel. That is remarkable. And eventually, we won't have to imagine it. Eventually, these will be verses we actually look on in fulfillment in that day. And Hosea had also recently prophesied about the ending of all war, and I include that reference in the notes in Hosea chapter 2, verse 18. He says, and I will abolish the bow and the sword and war from all the land, and I will make you lie down in safety. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful promise. All right, let's scoot down. But they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree. No one will make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. For all the peoples walk each in the name of its God, but we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever. Oh, I love it. It's just that worship, that claim of devotion of this is the most redemptive plan. And that's super beautiful. Okay, let's move down to verse 6. In that day declares the Lord, I will assemble the lame and gather those who have been driven away. It's beautiful because as he's describing the regathering of Jewish captives and refugees that are coming out of the tribulation period, he's really describing the great care that God takes to care for those who've been injured, those who are lame and who need assistance returning to the land. And he's describing that like specifically in detail. And the lame I will make the remnant, and those who were cast off, meaning the outcast who were scattered out into captivity or as refugees, I will make them a strong nation. And the Lord will reign over them in Mount Zion from this time forth and forevermore. It's a permanent kingdom. And it's a beautiful, beautiful promise that Micah is clinging on to because, again, his generation is right at the onset of what will be an interim fulfillment of that tribulation period with the Assyrian invasion. Verse 8, and you, O tower of the flock, O hill of the daughter of Zion, those are names for Jerusalem, to you shall it come, the former dominion shall come, the kingship for the daughter of Jerusalem. Basically saying the governing center, the authority, the reign and rule of your Messianic king will come to you, O Jerusalem. And then we have this lament, this crying out, this grief that Micah describes of the people of Israel during that tribulation period, both in the Assyrian invasion, where they're gripped, they're seized like a woman in labor. There you can see it there. For now you will go out from the city and you'll dwell in the open country and even eventually into Babylon. He's describing their captivity. Now that's a captivity that took place historically in, beginning in, what was it, 605 BC, around that time, the turn of the century there before Christ. But there's a future captivity in the final tribulation period where there is again a great grief and a seizing as a woman in labor, where Israel faces invasion and great adversarial threat again, but the promise remains the same. There you will be rescued. The Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies. This ultimate hope that's rooted in this grand biblical narrative that is essential to the redemption of the world and the fulfillment of the Great Commission. That's why we're looking at these passages. Now many nations are assembled against you, saying, "Let her be defiled. Let our eyes gaze upon Zion," essentially describing that Psalm 2 wicked army and this wicked confederation of nations that would seek to destroy the people of the covenant. The nations are assembled against you, but guess what? They don't know the thoughts of the Lord. They don't realize God has set a trap for them. They don't understand his plan, that he's gathered them. The Lord has gathered Israel's adversaries as sheaves to the threshing floor. Now, this is terrifying, terrifying language. And I include more about this in the notes. Essentially, the wicked confederation estimates that Jerusalem is an easy victim in her final tribulation. She's weak. We can invade her land and we can destroy this people of the covenant. But something else is going to take place, actually, that's going to really surprise them. Israel's Messiah arrives in Jerusalem with a supernaturally strengthened army of freed captives that he set free along his way as he proceeded through southern Judah and into Jerusalem. The arrival of the Messianic army, coupled with the appearance of the heavenly city, causes the wicked confederation to be overwhelmed with dread and crumble. And so the land of Israel is called the threshing floor, the land where they're all assembled. God prophetically calls it a threshing floor. And the freed captives who have been supernaturally strengthened by the Lord are the sledges of iron and bronze that crush their enemies like grain beneath their feet. So that imagery is some of the most brutal, defeat imagery. If you've got just these soft pieces of grain being crushed under the weight of massive sledges with these iron and bronze teeth and all these kind of smashing mechanisms against a stone threshing floor, that is the land of Israel. I mean, you can understand. He's describing a overwhelming, decisive, absolute military victory against Israel's enemies. That obviously did not fully happen. Of course, we saw the Lord sovereignly defeat the Assyrian army, but not Israeli troops. And so this is definitely yet unfulfilled. Nobody argues that this was directly fulfilled at the defeat of the Assyrian army at the hands of the angel of the Lord. That's a little bit different. We'll look at that when we get to Isaiah. Arise and thresh, O daughter of Zion, meaning the people, the returning captives who are being supernaturally strengthened as soldiers to defeat Israel's enemies. For I will make you a horn of iron and make your hooves bronze, and you'll beat into pieces many peoples and devote their grain to the Lord and their wealth of the wealth to the Lord of the whole earth. So again, huge military victory when Israel's Messiah returns and delivers them for their final deliverance. And I actually include a little bit more information about this metaphor of the threshing floor and the threshing sledges from a commentary in the notes. You can see that there. There's also some real helpful references that I would, kind of cross-reference this to, that Micah wouldn't have had to have just come up with this on his own. He could also look to Psalm 2, Psalm 58, Psalm 68, and Psalm 110 as all references of the same scenario that preceded Micah at the time he was prophesying. So quite a bit there. Let me make sure I'm not skipping anything else in my notes for this chapter, and then we're going to move on to chapter 5. Good. Okay. Perfect. let's get into chapter 5. We're doing well. Way to go, everybody. I always want to make sure I take a moment to pull up the chat. There it is. Hey, if you happen to be watching this, let me know where you're from. It's kind of a stormy day right now where I am, so I'm lucky to still have my internet and power. But Lord willing, we're going to get to the end of these. We've just got chapter 5 and chapter 7 left, so good. Let's jump in. Chapter 5. Now muster your troops, O daughter of troops. Now, the exact meaning of this opening phrase is a little bit uncertain, but essentially, the meaning of chapter 5, verse 1 is that the people of Israel are alarmed by the severity of the siege against Jerusalem that has even impacted and hit their present secular leadership, saying the siege has been laid against us. This is more like a sound the alarm, not a let's go win. It's a we're under attack, and the rod that the enemies, the adversaries, are striking even the present leadership of Israel on the cheek. Like they're actually damaging Israel's present leadership. Now that did happen in Micah's day with the Assyrian invasion that overcame the northern kingdom of Israel and did actually torture and injure, of course, the leadership of that day. But even then, Israel's leadership in the final tribulation faces great alarm and great difficulty, huge major challenges. For lack of a better word, we'll get to that more in later prophets. But you, O Bethlehem, now we're shifting. He's going to shift and say, hey, there's this great alarm, but let me tell you about the promise, the final deliverance, and let me tell you about the Messiah. He says, but you, O Bethlehem. This is that verse. This is the reference where, according to Scripture, Bethlehem is included in the Messiah's storyline. This is where we draw that prophecy from. You, O Bethlehem, who are little among the clans of Judah, but from you will come one who will be the ruler of Israel. This beautiful promise that Bethlehem's included in the Messiah's storyline, even as his birthplace, which Jesus did directly fulfill. From you will come one who will be the ruler of the earth. Now, here's the difficult part, is that this is why the disciples of Jesus' day assumed that Jesus would be taking authority immediately, that there would be an immediate fulfillment of all these passages. But it wasn't so. Jesus was crucified, resurrected, and then ascended, and there's this waiting period for his return, for Jesus to be revealed as the Messianic King who comes and fulfills the rest of this promise. So I do understand why Jews would take issue with the interpretation that Jesus is the fulfiller of this passage, because he doesn't go on to fulfill the rest of the chapter yet. But he will, and it should become more clear even the closer that we get to that day. But from you will come one who will be the ruler of Israel, whose coming is from old, from the ancient days, referring back to the initial, promises of the redemptive plan, dating all the way back to the time of Moses, and the Davidic covenant too. Therefore, he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. This one, some commentators like to say that, well, this has to be, of course, the Virgin Mary, who is Jesus' natural mother. But the rest of these chapters, the rest of these verses wouldn't fit with that interpretation, because the rest of these verses were not fulfilled at that time. And so therefore he shall give them up, meaning Israel is given to the period of their rebellion and then their proceeding subsequent tribulation, until she who is in labor is then kind of interpreted to be maybe Zion, maybe Jerusalem, maybe the land of Israel itself. Maybe it's just a representative of the covenant itself that is in labor, waiting for the birth. And the birth is the Messianic age. That's the baby that's being birthed, is the Messianic age. It's the fulfillment of the passages we're about to look at. So there's this period where we have this interim where Israel is given up to a period of rebellion and tribulation until the labor is complete and the baby is ready to be born. And what is the baby? Well, that's what we're going to look at here. Then the rest of his brothers shall return to the people of Israel, and he shall stand. The he there is the Messianic King, the one from Bethlehem, who will be Jesus, will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord and in the majesty of the name of the Lord God. And they shall dwell secure, for now he shall be great to the ends of the earth. Now, this is kind of a proto Great Commission passage describing the reign and gospel, the news of the Messianic King being made great to the ends of the earth. It sounds a lot like the Great Commission, though this came before the Great Commission. But Micah is trying to describe very clearly here in Micah chapter 5 what amounts to the fulfillment of the Great Commission in the Messianic age, with the shepherd reigning in shepherding his flock from Jerusalem. Again, that didn't happen at Jesus' first coming, but it does happen at his second coming. And so that's why she who is in labor is kind of a figurative representation of Zion or of the covenant, whatever it looks like, for the covenant birth to actually be completed. And he shall be their peace. Now this "and he shall be their peace," most commentators look at these are sort of a poem or a song that all go together. So that's why "and he shall be their peace" is verse 5, and it should be kind of paragraphed down. But the spacing here is not quite that way in my ESV version. But he shall be their peace. Most commentators say that "there" should actually be "our," saying this is going to be our peace. When the Messianic King comes, this is kind of a song or a song of hope for that tribulation period that Micah is giving to those who are going into captivity. When the Assyrian comes, now again, the Assyrian is not just ancient Assyria. Most commentators agree and they admit that the Assyrian has got to represent Israel's adversaries in a transcendent sense, because this was not fulfilled in Micah's day. If you were to say that the Assyrian in this case is only ancient Assyria, then you are arguing that Micah is a false prophet. And so most commentators won't go that far. Most commentators will say, no, the Assyrian is representative of Israel's adversaries all the way to the Antichrist. So this passage is beyond just Micah's generation because it's not fulfilled in his generation. When Israel's ultimate Assyrian, the final Assyrian, who is the Antichrist, comes into our land and treads on our palaces, then we will rise against him. 7 shepherds and 8 princes of men. Now that 7 of 8, 7 and 8 is kind of a Hebrew turn of phrase for an adequate number. Enough. We're going to have plenty. 7 and 8, if necessary. We'll have plenty. Enough princes of men who are going to be like these military generals of God's messianic army, who will shepherd the land of Assyria with a sword. So he's describing that messianic army. Where were they? They were just up here, weren't they? The threshers, the threshing army. That's what he's describing here. Who are going to shepherd the land of Assyria with the sword. This did not happen from the armies of Israel. You can maybe argue that it was Babylon, but again, that totally misses what Micah is trying to communicate here, that a final Assyrian who invades Israel is going to be defeated by military generals who are of the messianic army. It's beautiful. They will shepherd the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod and its entrances. Literally, like, they're going into the Assyrian territory. It's not just the liberation of Israel territory, but it is going into the Assyrian or the enemy territory and conquering it. And he shall deliver us from the Assyrian when he comes into our land and treads within our border. Huge promise for us yet to look forward to in the redemptive plan. Then the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many people. And now this is interesting. This is so cool. So we've talked about how as the Messiah is progressing toward Jerusalem in that day, the captives that he's setting free are being supernaturally rejuvenated. They're not being resurrected at that moment, but they're being supernaturally strengthened as soldiers to go conquer Israel's adversaries here. But the remnant who are captives and refugees also experience a supernatural rejuvenation as the Messiah comes into the land. Super interesting. So even the captives and the refugees in distant lands, the remnant who are in the midst of many peoples, become like the dew from the Lord, like showers on the grass, which delay not for man nor wait for the children of man. He starts to talk about they're starting to experience a covenant revitalization. They're starting to experience a covenant blessing, even at a distance, as they're making their way to regather back to the land. And the remnant of Jacob shall be among the nations and in the midst of many peoples, like a lion among the beasts of the forest, like a young lion among the flocks of the sheep. So there's even this supernatural strengthening of soldiers, even out in among the nations, among the people of Israel. When they go through, it treads down, it tears in pieces. There's none to deliver. They are basically, I mean, I don't know what to compare it to other than they become a blessed, unstoppable force for liberation and for the defeat of those who are seeking to exterminate them. I know it's quite serious conversation, but there's this deliverance that is both localized to the region, but also is experienced by the people of Israel who have been in flight all across the nations. Very interesting. Your hand shall be lifted over your adversaries, and your enemies shall be cut off. Whew. Okay, and in that day, here we go. In that day, this is at the time of the kind of inauguration of the Messianic age. The Lord is speaking to the people of Israel, but he's also speaking to the nations. It's a little bit of both. And he's saying, I'm going to cut off your horses from among you, destroy your chariots, and cut off the fortified cities in your land, and throw down all of your strongholds and cut off the sorceries from your land. Essentially, as Hosea had described, all of these places of misplaced trust where Israel had sought to secure their own destiny apart from the covenant. They've basically sought to build their own covenants to secure their own destiny and their own prosperity apart from God. God is saying, I'm going to remove all those things, all of these idols, all these areas of misplaced trust, your misplaced trust in your military, your misplaced trust in these diplomatic alliances that ultimately betrayed you, your misplaced trust in idolatry and sorcery. I'm going to remove all of this from the land. And you'll have no more tellers of fortunes. I will cut off your carved images and your pillars from among you. The pillars represent like actual stone monuments that they built to idols. And you'll bow down no more to the work of your hands. Again, idolatry. And I will root out your Asherah images from among you and destroy your cities. Now remember, Israel built a lot of this sorcerous stuff and carved images and pillars using the covenant blessing that God had given to them, took the land and the resources and started to devote it to idols when it was God who had given it to them. So he's really honing in on Hosea's message of, we're going to do away with the spiritual infidelity and we're going to come into a covenant kind of marriage relationship where it's just going to be us. I am your God, you are my people, and I'm going to, in anger and wrath, execute vengeance on the nations who do not obey, the nations who have no regard for God's covenant, and in fact, the opposite, they want to exterminate any remnant of God's covenant. God says, I'm going to execute my vengeance on those nations in that day. All right, so that's the end of chapter 5. Remarkable stuff. Sounds very similar to Amos and Hosea, I know. Oh yeah, Amos 6 is where we get this beautiful passage where here, similar to Hosea, when Hosea is saying, hey, I know you're used to bringing all these offerings when you come to atone for sins and renew your covenant with the Lord, but let me tell you what the Lord is really going to desire. And here, Micah is doing the same thing. What is the Lord going to be pleased with? Do I bring 1,000 rams? Do I bring 10,000 rivers of oil? Man, shall I give my firstborn? What do I got to do to bring to the Lord that's an adequate gift? There's really nothing. And here's what Micah says. He says, God's told you what's good, what you need to bring. Maybe he's even referencing Hosea, because Hosea gave it to them like specifically. I don't know, that he might actually be Hosea, now that I think about it, but truly the Lord, through Hosea even, has told you, oh man, what is good. This is what the Lord requires, that you do justice, that you love kindness, and that you walk humbly with your God. Awesome passage. It's there. Of course, I'm not including Micah 6 as a whole chapter. I'm going to move down actually to Micah 7. All right, final chapter for this week. Here we go. Micah 7. Micah describes the widespread corruption of Israel's leadership in that day and in that ultimate day, and the persecution of the righteous that precedes the final tribulation, along with God's promise to regather and restore Jewish captives and Jewish refugees in the Messianic age, even with the promise of caring for them as when they came out of the land of Egypt, which we'll see here in a moment. So here Micah is grieving just the rebellion. He's grieving the rebellious attitude of Israel against the covenant, saying, woe is me, I'm becoming like the summer fruit at the end. The harvest is over, and now we're running out of food. I'm coming down to being one of the last of the prophets, actually. Which, I mean, he's not the actual last, because he's contemporary with Isaiah and Hosea and Amos. So he's not truly alone, but he's grieving that, gosh, the righteous are perishing from the land, meaning people are turning aside to wickedness. Even the people of the covenant are starting to persecute and cancel and deplatform, or even worse, imprison and kill those who are upright among God's people and among mankind. So he's saying the wicked, the godly are perishing from the land. He's saying they're removing the influence of the godly from society. They're removing them, their influence. They're not listening to them, and they're marginalizing them and persecuting them, even specifically. And that's got to be, I mean, that's real grievous to be Micah, who is loyal to the covenant, seeing the faithful having to go into hiding, being deplatformed, no longer having a voice. And and then he says, so here's what's happening among the wicked. They're laying in wait for blood. Each hunts the other with a net. Their hands are on what is evil to do it well. And this is interesting. Their hands are on what is evil. I mean, I think you could argue that this represents just wicked corruption, wicked deeds, but on what is evil, they do it well. I think that even may have to do with the persecution. I think it may even have to do with the persecution. But either way, they are optimizing. They're dedicating energy to optimize wickedness and sin. It's really what he's getting after. But their hands are on what is evil could even mean even the wicked confederation whose hands are set to destroy and invade, the people of Israel. I may be a reference to that too. I don't exactly know the full scope of what he's referring to. Most commentators are saying he's focusing on the wickedness among the people of Israel. But if he's talking about the wicked nations, there could be more to it as well. All right, and the prince and the judge are asking for bribes, and the great man, meaning they're exalting the role models in their midst are people who just utter the evil desires of their hearts. Gosh, I can think of that happening today in quite a many ways, where the people who are called great in society are just uttering nonsense that is so anti the covenant of God or righteousness in any way. Anyway, thus they weave it together. The best of them is like a briar. The most upright among them are a thorn or thorn hedge, meaning there's like this instant harm and entanglement that they cause. The day of your watchmen, the day of your punishment has come. Now their confusion is at hand. Okay, I think the day of your watchmen, the day of your punishment has come. Now their confusion is at hand means here comes the tribulation. I actually think he's talking about the onset of the tribulation. The invaders are coming, and your tribulation is at hand. I don't think he's talking about your deliverer is at hand. I think he means the tribulation is at hand, because here's what happens in verse 5. This massive betrayal culture that many other biblical prophets say characterizes the time period of the tribulation. Betrayal is everywhere because everybody is in fight or flight. Everybody is breaking down because of the weight of the pressure of the tribulation. And so Micah says, put no trust in your neighbor. Have no confidence in a friend. Guard the doors of your mouth with her from her who lies in your arms. Even your cared partners and spouses and children. For the son treats the father with contempt, and the daughter rises up against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own house. It's just this widespread civil breakdown, social breakdown. It's horrible what happens in the tribulation. And he's not even getting into all the pressure and horrors of the tribulation as much as other authors do. He's just honing in on people are going to be so dysregulated and under so much pressure that there's so much betrayal that starts to happen. And look here, that's why I think the day of your watchmen and your punishment and confusion is really talking about the tribulation. All right, let's move down to verse 7. But as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation as the tribulation is onset. As for me, I will look to the Lord, because he's recognizing the redemptive plan. The same as Hosea, when Hosea said this tribulation period has a redemptive factor because it's meant to detox you from your rebellion, to wake you up to God's heart, his jealousy for you, and the redemptive nature of the discipline of what's happening. And look what Micah says, basically responding to Hosea almost. I think directly. I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. This is what Hosea says many times. We looked at it last week. So rejoice not over me, my enemies, saying those who are the enactors of the tribulation, really who he's talking to. Let me scroll up. Those who have gathered and they're in a trap. Where are they? Was that all the way back in chapter 4? Yeah, here they are. The wicked nations who have gathered, who have assembled, saying, let's exterminate them. But they don't know the trap that's been set. Saying, in light of this, now let's go down. From Hosea 4 to Hosea, 7. Sorry, I know I'm jumping around. So rejoice not over me, O my enemy, you deceived nations and wicked confederation. When I fall, I will rise. When I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me. I will bear the indignation of the Lord because I have sinned against him. Now he's kind of doing this identity intercession where he's identifying with the sin of his people, and he's almost speaking on their behalf. Like, even though we are falling right now, even though this tribulation has come upon us, don't gloat over us, because even though we sit in darkness here for a moment, the Lord is going to be our light. I will bear the Lord's indignation because we've sinned against him until he pleads our cause and executes judgment for me, or in that identity type of way for us, for his people, as he's kind of standing in the gap as an intercessor. He will bring us out to the light, and we will look upon his vindication. Then my eyes will see, and shame will cover her. Those who said to me, that's kind of a funny grammar, but shame will cover those who said to me, where's your God? My eyes will look upon them. Now they will be trampled down like the mire in the streets. A day for building up the walls. Now the thing shifts. We're coming out of the tribulation because the deliverer is arriving, the day of shame for Israel's adversaries, and it becomes a day for building up your walls, for expanding your boundary. Isaiah is going to take that a little bit further to say, literally, the Lord's going to reset Israel's boundaries in that day to their original promise. And we'll talk about that more when we get to Isaiah. Micah's just giving us a subtle reference there that the boundary is going to be re-extended because in that day, all the people are going to be coming. The refugees and the captives, the people of Israel are going to be returning. I do think it's really, I think is the captives. Oh, wow. I just opened up the whole word study there. Sorry. In that day, they, being the Jewish captives and refugees who've been cast out from the land, will all be coming. They'll be coming from Assyria and coming from Egypt. And I think most commentators and teachers will commonly suggest that Assyria represents the places where Jews have been taken captive. They've been the threats and adversaries. And Egypt actually represents shelters and allies who have sheltered Jewish refugees and hidden them in their tribulation. So from Egypt to the river, meaning from Egypt to the Euphrates, from sea to sea, essentially that usually is prophetic language for all the land, from mountain to mountain. But the earth will be desolate because of its inhabitants, for the fruit of their deeds. So this is an interesting one. The earth will be desolate. A lot of commentators don't spend a whole lot of time here, but I think if you think about it, there's been a lot of war, there's conquering happening, and there's a lot of exploitation of populations and natural resources even in that rebellious period that precedes the tribulation. And then there's a huge conflict that takes place during the tribulation. And while we have Psalm 104 and other promises of the restoration of the land of Israel, while the restoration of Israel's land is taking place, the surrounding area, quite practically, is desolate because of the exploitive practices, the predatory practices, and the warfare that's just taken place. I think that's actually quite literal because of its inhabitants and the fruit of their deeds. And that's going to be desolation that has to be addressed during the Messianic age. So very, very interesting. But I think there's probably several meanings for the earth will be desolate. Nobody really considers that to mean the land of Israel will be desolate, because the land of Israel is undergoing a restoration, but it's the outside territories, the surrounding region will be desolate because of the actions of the rebellion and the tribulation. Okay. Anyway, we'll come back to that later. There's going to be other prophets that'll address that better than Micah does here. So here comes this prayer. Micah sees that the tribulations, we've rebelled, the tribulation is coming upon us, and the Lord's eventually going to regather all the refugees to a Messianic age in the Messianic land of Israel. So, in that regathering, Lord, shepherd your people with your staff, the flock of your inheritance, who dwell among the forest and in the garden land. Saying, God, will you care for them, provide for your people, shepherd them? Basically saying, fulfill your promises as they're being regathered. And this compassionate reference back to even the care that God has for the lame in those days, which we looked at back in chapter 4, was it? Let me look. In that day, I will assemble those who've been driven away, and even those who are afflicted and outcast and the lame. That comes from Micah 4, verses 6 and 7. We just looked at that. But here he is again saying, God, will you care for your people as they're being regathered, as they're coming out of captivity, and shepherd them, fulfill your promises to them. It's a beautiful prayer. Shepherd your people with your staff. Let them graze in Bashan and Gilead as in the days of old, basically inheriting the land in peace. And we'll get into what Bashan and Gilead mean a little later, but basically bring them back to the land to resettle it in peace, untroubled safety. As in the days, so here's the Lord's response. This is so cool. Here's the Lord's response to Micah's prayer. As in the days when you came out of Egypt, I will show them marvelous things. How awesome that he's going to care for them. He's going to provide for them miraculously, as when they came out of the land of Egypt. What an incredible promise. The rest of the nations will see the defeat of Israel's adversaries and this great restoration that's taking place. They'll be ashamed of all their might. The glory of what the Messiah establishes will be so glorious that it puts everything else that's ever come to shame. They will lay their hands on their mouths. Their ears will be deaf. They will lick the dust like a serpent and crawling like the crawling things of the earth. They will come trembling out of their strongholds. They shall turn in dread to the Lord their God. They will be in fear of you, speaking of the people, as they're returning to the land. This is really similar language to when the Messiah arrives and the heavenly city appears and the Messianic army is doing what they're doing. There's that dread that overcomes them. And there are cross-references to that, I think, in the notes. Let me make sure. I think a couple, like Psalm 48 and Psalm 68, have some similar language to this. And they will turn in dread to the Lord. So this is again describing those wicked nations basically being overcome with dread as all this is taking place, because the dread that they sought to inflict onto Israel is now being returned onto them as the Messiah returns. Who is a God like you? So here's Micah. Well, I'm getting them all confused, but here's Micah's response. So we have Micah's prayer, shepherd your people. We have God's response. As in the days when you came out of the land of Egypt, I will show you wondrous things, and all your enemies will be overcome with dread, and they'll even be afraid of you, of my people, as they're coming back. So here's Micah's response. Who is a God like you? pardoning iniquity, passing over transgression for the remnant of his inheritance. He just breaks out. And even though there was all this rebellion, even though your people persecuted the righteous and sought to remove them from society and from the land, which we saw here in verse 2, you pardon iniquity. You remove our transgressions from us. He does not retain his anger forever because he delights in steadfast love. He will again have compassion on us. He will tread our iniquities underfoot. He will cast our sins into the depths of the sea. You will show faithfulness to Jacob and steadfast love to Abraham, as you have sworn to our fathers from the days of old, going all the way back to what we looked at in weeks 1 and 2, those first couple of videos. You can go back and see those early promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Moses and David. How awesome. And then that's the end of chapter 7. But let me just look at this. This beautiful verse 18. He passes over transgressions for the remnant of his inheritance. Now, this is amazing language that he also could have drawn from other prophets. Let me grab this in the notes. Let's go to the very last page. Let's see, I need to scoot it up so that you can read it. There we go. I know you really can't read it very well, but I want to show you that it's here on the very last page in chapter 7. Here they are. Let me read to you some of these that parallel this verse 18 so beautifully. Again, he has just said, let me pull it up. Who is a God like you who pardons iniquity and passes over transgressions? You're not angry forever. You delight in steadfast love. You have compassion on us and tread our iniquities underfoot and cast all our sins into the depths of the sea. So that's what Micah has just said. Here are some other passages he could be drawing from. Deuteronomy 32, Moses, in the Song of Moses, says, "For the Lord will vindicate his people and have compassion on his servants when he sees their power is gone, and when there's none remaining, bond or free." Or how about Psalm 103? I think Psalm 103 is probably the strongest parallel reference. From David, he could have referenced this, saying, "He will not always chide, nor will he keep his anger forever. He does not deal with us according to our sins, nor repay us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love for those who fear them. As far as the east is from the west, so does he remove our transgression from us." So Micah could be referencing that. Or how about Amos 9? Amos had just said, "Except the Lord will not utterly destroy the house of Jacob." And he goes on to describe Jacob's restoration. Or how about Hosea chapter 1? Hosea said, "Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And the place where it was said to them, 'You're not my people,' it shall be said to them, 'Children of the living God.'" Or Micah himself, kind of bringing it full circle from Micah chapter 4, where he says, "There you will be rescued. The Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies." What a beautiful, beautiful promise. I love this closing bit of Micah. What a crazy book. We just went through a lot. And then there's Nahum. So that's the end. We're done with today. We're finished up our passages from Micah. Awesome. Whew. Okay, so thank you all for sticking around for the stream. We're just a little bit over time, but this is about as long as it's been taking. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you've enjoyed today's stream. Next week, I'm expecting to jump into Isaiah. We're going to really start unpacking some stuff because Isaiah is probably the most comprehensive Old Testament prophet concerning God's redemptive plan and the end of the age. So very fascinating stuff that we'll start to look at there. So I want to say a special thank you also to our ministry partners. All this content and much more is made available for free because of your prayers and your support. You can find a lot more free content and partner with us on our website and the Servant Leader Network app. And now I'm going to switch over to the online discussion group in our Servant Leader Network app. So if you're a ministry partner, jump over there, go to the community section, open up the call that we have on there so that we can do some discussion together. And we have a lot to talk about. So I'm excited to hear your comments and your questions about these chapters. And if you want to join that discussion group or our core group of ministry partners, check out our website. There's no donation required. And you can mark your calendar to join us every Friday at 11 a.m. Central Time. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for watching. You guys are awesome. And let's